In the 1960s and 70s, countries like India, Pakistan and Afghanistan, Iran, Syria and Turkey were a magnet for tourists, not terrorists. It was a rite of passage for thousands of mostly young Westerners to trek overland through Asia by bus, train or clapped-out combi. An adventure that became known as the Hippie Trail. For these 20 or so travellers, the journey begins in London, but the adventure begins in Istanbul. The Galata Bridge, connecting the old and new sections of Istanbul across the banks of the Golden Horn, symbolically connecting the continents of Europe and Asia. Istanbul, ancient Byzantium, settled more than 2,500 years ago by the Greek king Byzas. Conquered by Rome in 330 AD, it became the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire and renamed Constantinople after Constantine, the first Christian Roman emperor. At the heart of this historic World Heritage listed precinct are the Sultan Ahmed Mosque, better known as the Blue Mosque, and Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom. Originally it was the heart of Orthodox Christianity until converted into an Islamic mosque and now a museum, but still one of the world's great architectural structures. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Constantinople was officially renamed Istanbul in 1930, rich in history, architecture and culture. To the south, a whole different world, the southwestern coastline, known as the Turquoise Coast. A tourism hotspot rich in history and archaeology, its fine beaches sandwiched between the Mediterranean and spectacular mountains. Turkey today has 17 World Heritage Sites, among them Göreme National Park and the rock sites of Cappadocia in central Turkey. Millions of years ago, volcanoes erupted. The ash consolidated to form a soft rock called tuff. This sandstone-like rock, sculptured by nature and its inhabitants, architecture created by removing rather than building structures. Wind and water eroded the tuff into surreal shapes of spires, cones and mushroom-like shapes. But from as far back as the 4th century, locals carved out sanctuaries, initially to protect themselves from wildlife and harsh weather, later to protect Christians from persecution by Roman soldiers. They carved entire cities underground, some as much as 80 metres deep and over 8 levels. The interconnected cities were self-sufficient, with kitchens, toilets, wine houses and cereal storage, even churches. Everything needed to sustain life against all that man and nature could throw against them. Survival was at the heart of another architectural phenomenon, Crusader castles. This is the best preserved example, Crac de Chevalier, near Tarsus in Syria. Originally a Kurdish garrison built on a hilltop in the strategic Homs Gap, it was captured in the 12th century by the Crusaders to house a garrison of 2,000 and fortified to survive a siege of up to 5 years. But it wasn't a siege that caused it to fall. In 1271, the Mamelukes reportedly forged a letter from the Crusaders' commander in Tripoli, ordering them to surrender the castle. Incredibly, they did as ordered, proving once again the pen is mightier than the sword. But recent history has been more destructive. In 2012, Crac de Chevalier was occupied by rebel forces in the Syrian civil war. There was substantial damage, and it won't be safe for tourists to go back anytime soon. Another archaeological victim of the current war in Syria, the ancient city of Palmyra, described by the United Nations as one of the most important cultural centres of the ancient world. In May 2015, it was occupied by ISIS, who destroyed monuments they considered to be idolatrous. When ISIS was finally driven out in March 2017, they left a trail of fresh destruction. Palmyra, literally city of palm trees, was an oasis in the Syrian desert. People are recorded as living here 4,000 years ago. It was called Tadmur then, still is by some. A caravan stop for travellers, it came under Roman control in the 1st century AD. In its World Heritage listing, UNESCO says it grew steadily and describes it as an important city at the crossroads of trade routes linking Persia, India and China with the Roman Empire. Its architecture, temples, theatres and monuments are a spectacular marriage of Greco-Roman, local and Persian influence. It thrived for over 400 years as a paradise for caravan traders and merchants, but its demise came when Queen Zenobia revolted and declared independence from Rome. Just 2 years later, the Romans regained control and destroyed the city. There are now plans to restore the structures damaged by ISIS, with other plans to recreate the city's spectacular monuments through 3D printing processes. Palmyra is the city that refuses to die. To the south in Jordan, one of the world's most iconic desert landscapes, Wadi Rum. Arabic for Valley of the Romans, it's also called Valley of the Moon for its lunar landscape. Its sandstone mountains and valleys, natural arches, narrow gorges, towering cliffs are World Heritage listed. Made famous by Lawrence of Arabia, its spectacular landscape was the backdrop for numerous movies, including Star Wars Rogue One. Where Wadi Rum was carved by nature, nearby Petra, the Rose City, was carved from nature. There's probably no more dramatic entrance to a city in the world. The Treasury, a spectacular facade carved out of the soft sandstone. Beyond the facade is what the United Nations calls one of the world's richest and largest archaeological sites. Petra was the capital of the Nabatean Empire between 400 BC and 106 AD, and it's believed to have been home to more than 30,000 people. It was a major caravan centre for the incense of Arabia, the silks of China, and the spices of India. Petra's importance as a trade route diminished after the Romans moved in, and gradually it fell into obscurity. Local Bedouins, fearing treasure hunters, kept its location secret, but all that changed in 1812 when a Swiss explorer, Jean-Louis Bercart, became the first Westerner to visit in more than 600 years. According to National Geographic, archaeological exploration of Petra is still in its infancy, with just 15% of the city excavated, leaving 85% still underground and untouched. In 2007, Petra was named one of the new 7 Wonders of the World. There is arguably no city more contentious than Jerusalem. One of the oldest cities in the world, Jerusalem was first settled 5,500 years ago. King David made it the capital of the Jewish kingdom 3,000 years ago. The Holy City, sacred to Christian, Jewish and Muslim religions. The City of Peace. According to some calculations, Jerusalem has been destroyed twice, besieged 23 times, attacked 52 times, captured and recaptured 44 times. It seems destined not to live up to its name. In the Arab world, no matter how much time changes, it seems to stay the same. Nowhere is that better seen than in Iran, formerly Persia, said to be one of the world's oldest continuous major civilizations. Deeply rooted in the Islamic religion for the past 1500 years, Iran has retained its distinctive Persian language and culture despite invasions by the Greeks, Arabs, Turks and Mongols. Iran boasts what some call one of the most beautiful cities in the world, Isfahan. Before Tehran, the Persian capital. Its stunning architecture and art have led it to being described as the cultural heart of the Eastern Islamic world. According to an old Persian proverb, Isfahan is called half the world. From here, you can see each half of the world. Poets, travellers and merchants thought of it as the centre of the world. There is no place more symbolic of Iran's history than Persepolis, the capital of the Achaemenid Empire. Begun by Darius the Great in 518 BC and completed by his son and grandson over 60 years, it was the ultimate showcase of power. A storybook in stone of the empire's greatness, and almost every wall, entrance and stairway was covered by sculpted friezes, and everywhere the likenesses of Darius the Great. Then along came Alexander the Great. In 330 BC he captured the city and in a drunken whim set fire to it and destroyed it in reprisal for the burning of Greek temples in Athens by the Persians 150 years earlier. Alexander returned to Persepolis several years later and reportedly regretted what he had done. Persepolis was abandoned and lost to time until excavations in 1931 revealed the remains in all their glory. The United Nations now describes it as among the world's greatest archaeological sites, the gem of Persian architecture and art. In the mid-70s, we were very relaxed about travelling through Iran and into Afghanistan. Iran was still 3 years away from the dramatic Islamic Revolution, although Afghanistan had, just 3 years earlier, kicked out the monarchy to become a republic. Afghanistan, a landlocked country at the very heart of the trade routes between East and West. One historian described it as the roundabout of the ancient world. It seems Afghanistan was in perpetual conflict. Everyone wanted a piece of it. Among them, the Persians under Darius the Great in 550 BC, the Greeks under Alexander the Great in 330 BC, Arabs in 600 AD, the Mongols under Genghis Khan in the 13th century, the British in the 19th century, the Russians in the 20th century, and more recently, the Taliban. It was the Arabs who brought Islam to Afghanistan, but it's also flirted at various times with Zoroastrianism, Hinduism and Buddhism. In central Afghanistan, Bamiyan Valley, a Buddhist enclave from the 2nd century to the time of the Arab invasion in the 7th century. In numerous caves they built monasteries, chapels and sanctuaries. But the most spectacular of all were 2 monumental statues of Buddha carved into the rock face. Tragically, these were dynamited by the Taliban in 2001. Like Palmyra, they were destroyed because they were considered to be idolatrous. Stung by the destruction, the Afghan government and United Nations, with financial support of the South Korean government, are building a cultural centre at the foothills of the Bamiyan Cliffs. It is due to be completed in 2019. If you are travelling between Iran and its eastern neighbour Pakistan for tourism, trade or invasion, you need to go through the spectacular and strategically located Khyber Pass. Cars to the left, camels to the right, according to the sign. Pakistan gained its independence in 1947 when Britain relinquished its hold on the Indian subcontinent, allowing for the creation of India, West Pakistan and East Pakistan, which became known as Bangladesh in 1971. More than just a political arrangement, it became a religious arrangement. Upwards of 10 million Muslims fled India to take up residence in the Pakistans, 8 million in West Pakistan. And a similar number of Sikhs and Hindus fled Pakistan for India. It took less than a year, but it didn't ease the tension between the two countries. It just gave them another reason to be bitter enemies. For the Sikhs, the centre of their religion was just across the border, in the city of Amritsar. This is Harmandir Sahib, literally the house of God, but in the west known as the Golden Temple, so called because the heart of the complex is covered in 750 kilograms of gold leaf. Built in 1604 on an island in the middle of a sacred pool called the Amritasaras, Pool of Nectar, the complex is a stunning blend of Hindu and Islamic architecture in dazzling white marble. For the devotees of the Hindu religion, the spiritual capital is Varanasi, on the banks of the sacred river, the Ganges. The home of the god Shiva, it is one of the most important places for pilgrimage for Hindus. 80% of Indians identify as Hindus, and with an estimated 1 billion followers worldwide, it is the third largest religion after Christianity and Islam. They come here to bathe in its waters, wash away their sins, pay homage to their ancestors, and collect its water for use in rituals, and to die. To die and be cremated at Varanasi and have your ashes spread on the Ganges is said to be the best death possible. For tourists, it is confronting, mesmerising, not a city for the faint-hearted. There is no greater celebration of life and love than the Taj Mahal in Agra. It was built by Emperor Shah Jahan in memory of his wife Mumtaz Mahal, who died giving birth to their 14th child. Completed in 1653, it took 22 years to build. More than 1,000 elephants were used to transport the white marble from all over India and Central Asia, fashioned by 22,000 masons, stonecutters, inlayers, carvers, painters, calligraphers, dome builders and other artisans. Located in the corner of a vast garden, the Taj Mahal is renowned for its perfect balance, symmetry and harmony. The Taj Mahal, literally a labour of love, and rightly regarded as one of the 7 wonders of the world. For sheer natural beauty, there are few places in the world that surpass Srinagar, summer capital of the northern Indian state of Kashmir. A mile above sea level, at the western end of the Himalayas, it is surrounded by clear lakes and wooded mountains, subtropical in summer, alpine in winter. Dal Lake, no more enticing or relaxing way to spend a holiday than on one of the ornate wooden houseboats. Getting around the lakes and canals of Srinagar, you have to travel by wooden boat. For the tourists, there's the Shakira, a small gondola-like version, and no more romantic way to get to and from your houseboat. On land, artisans, old and young, handcraft the famous Kashmiri silk carpets, rugs and scarves. A bike ride around the lake reveals the contradictions of Srinagar. The Shalimar Gardens, built by Mughal Emperor Jahangir more than 400 years ago, and nearby, dark, eerie buildings that could be the set of a horror movie. Today, frequent civilian strikes and violent clashes between Indian government forces and militant separatists means that Srinagar is off limits to tourists. For now, paradise is cancelled. Looming large, physically and metaphorically over this corner of Asia, are the Himalayas. Nepal, home to 8 of the 10 highest mountains in the world. When our group visited in 1976, we were among 90,000 foreign tourists that year. Now, despite political and geological upheavals of the past decade, about 500,000 more visit each year. Rich in cultural heritage, the ancient cities of the Kathmandu Valley have no fewer than 7 World Heritage listed sites within a 7-kilometre radius. In this multi-religious country, 80% of devotees are Hindus. But this is also the place of pilgrimage for devotees of the Buddhist faith. Nepal was the birthplace of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. In the 60s and 70s, Nepal was all about mountain climbing and trekking. Everest and Annapurna were the holy grails for foreigners. The summit for climbers, base camp for tourists. The spectacular ice peaks are still the main attraction, and this is why. These days, not only can you see it on foot, but also a hot air balloon, ultralight aircraft or paraglider. You can also experience it through river rafting or mountain bike riding. Nepal now has 15 national parks, 2 are World Heritage listed. Mountain villages that you find the real Nepal. Its people. It may not be currently feasible to travel the Hippie Trail as many did 40 years ago, but it's not just about the places you've seen, it's about the people and cultures who created it over the thousands of years. It's travelling in their footsteps, experiencing the lives they lived, and at the end of the journey, being able to reflect on that, even 40 years later.